just to inspire. It's a small task, but let's see how it goes. I brought a little story, so to say, but I'm very much looking forward to a conversation afterwards. So yeah, let's do this. Um, I think I don't think anyone leaves Hertie thinking or expecting to feel invisible, but that was actually my experience exactly. Not because I didn't lack ambition, but because I had kind of trained to enter a system, and nobody had trained me to decide whether that very system itself was right for me personally or right for the work that I wanted to do. And throughout our lives, we are educated to navigate institutions. We are really educated on the question of how those institutions were built or whether they are designed for the moment that we're in. And that realization early on in my career really changed the complete direction of my life. And it's why I stand here not simply as a newly formed, hi, not simply as a new social entrepreneur, but as someone who arrived at building ventures after kind of testing the limits of civil society, party politics, and philanthropy from the inside. And tonight I want to trace that journey with you and share why I came to believe that imagination actually is not luxury in this time of transition, but it is a necessity and it is responsibility as well. So after hurting, I didn't immediately go into institutional politics, but I joined Each One Teach One, which is a Black empowerment organization embedding here in Berlin. And at EOTO, I led an anti-discrimination counseling, and I also helped to manage a community-based fund called the Maya Yim Fund. And at the time, I did not think of it as entrepreneurship, but more so as kind of stepping up. But I quickly realized something much deeper, and that is that fighting injustice and building capacity to fight injustice are two sides of the same coin, and you cannot really dismantle structures without strengthening the people who are navigating these structures. And then the war in Ukraine happened. Black people and people of color were fleeing war, were being treated as second-class refugees, turned away from buses, blocked at checkpoints, detained even. And we watched institutional protection fail in real time. And we, as Black people in Germany, we made a decision. We would not wait. We organized bus convoys, we created welcome infrastructure, we mobilized networks across borders. And in retrospect, that was entrepreneurial. But at the time, it was simply responsibility. It was identifying a gap between what should exist and what existed, and stepping into that gap to fill it. Around that period, I was honored with the Hertie Alumni Achievement Awards. That was in 2022. And something interesting happened there as I was presented as the winner. A former assistant teacher of mine, actually a stats assistant teacher of mine, who at that time was in a foundation role, decided to support the work financially with quite a significant contribution. And I learned another important lesson, and that is that networks, sometimes they activate later when people have access to decision-making power and when they have access to funding. So even though right after Hertie, that network was not there to give me a job, but later on it would definitely make sense. So this is a good network to have. But entrepreneurship is not only about ideas, it is this long-term relational capital and long-term relational trust that you build. But even or especially in moments of collective mobilization, I noticed something rather troubling. People entered civil society with deep intrinsic motivation, but alignment was often fragile. We spoke about Black liberation, we spoke about justice, but we rarely paused to really clarify, what do we actually mean by these words? my understanding of liberation might differ very much from your understanding of liberation. And if that difference remains unspoken, this is then when strategy, when cohesion in an organization starts to fragment, and burnout accelerates and trust erodes. And that was also kind of one of the first lessons in what would later become one of the pillars at Imagineers Lab, my organization, which is holistic transformation. The idea behind it is you cannot change system if you do not align internally, personally, and collectively on what you're actually building towards. And whatever you're building towards better has space to incorporate all of you, all of people, lest you risk later misalignment and all the negatives that come with it. Strategy does not create alignment, but alignment creates strategy. In 2019, I entered party politics with the Greens. I hence call myself a recovering Green. So I always say that when I introduce myself. One of the big slogans back then, it's still a big slogan, is representation matters. And so I asked myself, if representation matters, then why shouldn't I represent? What I encountered in party politics was not necessarily evil, maybe some evil, but not necessarily evil. It was incentive structures. Political parties are designed for coherence, power retention, power accumulation, and message discipline. And civil society, on the other hand, is designed for urgency, advocacy, and mostly moral clarity. And I learned something very essential. Your impact is shaped less by your intentions than by the incentive structure you operate inside. That realization, though it might be a bleak realization in some way, deepened my understanding of what holistic transformation would look like, because transformation is not just ideological, it is deeply structural. And if the structure rewards caution over courage, you will get caution. And if the structure rewards optics over substance, then of course you will get optics. And understanding system does not necessarily mean rejecting them. It means recognizing how they were shaped and how they shape behavior, including your own. And once you see that, you gain agency. You can choose to operate inside it, to bend it, or to build something new altogether. I then, in 2023, became co-director of the Multitudes Foundation, which is now the Better Politics Foundation, which supports political change makers and innovators across Europe. Building these institutions from the ground up with the governance structure, the strategy, and seven-figure budgets, that was also very transformative for me, because it normalized responsibility at scale. But across civil society, politics, and philanthropy, I kept seeing similar patterns. And there was high intrinsic motivation of people who enter these structures, deep care, significant risk aversion. Institutions often fear uncertainty more than they fear injustice. And then there are structural contradictions, public funding that is tied to governments whose policies you may oppose. Philanthropic capital often exists because of tax architectures that protect wealth. So the question then becomes, how do you transmute resources from imperfect systems into outcomes that at least bend towards justice? And that's not necessarily a moral purity question. It is, again, a design question. So how do we go about designing ecosystems, communities, and new institutions that have the capacity to transmute action? This is where the second pillar of Imagineers Lab crystallized for me, and that is epistemic justice. Because I noticed something else. When crisis intensifies, for example, when extremist rhetoric around remigration became publicly known in 2024. I think some of you may remember that AFD and so forth, they were meeting to talk about remigration of people with migrant backgrounds. But often, so civil And as a response to this, civil society mobilized, but often within a familiar epistemic frame. BIPOC knowledge, Black and people of color knowledge, lived experience, navigating institutional failure, all of this was not centered. It wasn't necessarily excluded deliberately, but it was sidelined. And this is not necessarily unjust, although there is a justice dimension to it, but it is also strategically short-sighted. Communities who have lived through systemic instability often hold advanced knowledge about how institutions behave under stress, but incorporating that knowledge cannot be extractive. It must be reciprocal. It must honor recognition, authorship, and value flow. And that is then epistemic justice in practice. The turning point came after I left philanthropy. I traveled among many other countries to Peru as well. We just talked about this. I listened a lot. I did a 10-day silent meditation retreat, Vipassana, very much recommend that, to do that. With no phone, no speaking, no inputs, no output from you. It's just you and your thoughts. And what it gave me was not necessarily spirituality, although that was also part of it, but it gave me cognitive clarity, pattern recognition, bandwidth limitation, because you didn't have to make decisions. You just had your plan, your daily plan, you just did it. And through that, I saw something very clearly. Across all sectors, people were always reacting, firefighting, very rarely visioning, which brought me back to the earlier misalignment that I had seen. We were fighting for things or against things, against structural discrimination, against this bill that is coming up, against this injustice, but not always articulating clearly what we were building towards. And that insight then became the third pillar of our work, which is generative imagination. Not imagination as just fantasy, but imagination as a structured future making. And this became concrete in one particular project. We were asked to evaluate a funding program from a bigger, larger German foundation. And the classic question then often is, how do you measure impact? And social impact is long-term, it's diffuse, it is very hard to quantify because you cannot just measure the amount of workshops that you have given you. That doesn't give you any idea of what the impact was. So we asked different questions. If change is real, where does it first occur? In our view, it occurs in perception, it occurs in confidence, in how someone experiences themselves in relation to power. In philosophy, this subjective phenomena is called qualia. It's the subjective experience that you have. So you and I might look at a sunset, but have vastly different experiences because there's so much more attached to it, memories, aspiration, whatever. So this is your qualia. So yeah, we built a model that would track shifts in the qualia. How did participants feel about engaging funders before and after the program? Did they experience themselves as legitimate actors or as imposters? How did community dynamics shift when resources entered the picture? Instead of measuring only outputs, we measured internal perception shifts, because transformation, that was the claim, begins internally before it materializes externally. And that is generative imagination operationalized. And that is also holistic transformation grounded in epistemic justice. Many of you are being prepared for institutional careers. Some of you already have started with the entrepreneurial journal, and that's very valuable. But do not confuse preparation with predestination. You're not obligated, obviously, to walk the path that seems most legible. If you understand how systems are built, if you recognize patterns and blind spots, if you protect your imagination from constant reaction, you will begin to see openings where others mostly see walls. We are right now in this very moment living in an interregnum. The old world is dying, a new world is being born. I mean, Even the German chancellor talks about the end of the international rules-based order. I don't know if you saw the speech in the Munich Security Conference, but this is now really a transitional phase that we're in. And old assumptions are eroding, new architectures are being formed, and in such moments, imagination becomes political scaffolding. And entrepreneurship then, again, becomes responsibility, not disruption for its own sake, but coherent response to structural transition. And for me, building Imagineers Lab was not rebellion, but it was really alignment. You may arrive somewhere completely different, but if you do arrive consciously, and when you do, make sure that you're not just entering a system, make sure you understand how it was built and ultimately how it can be shaped. Thank you. All right. Any questions, impressions, things you'd like to add, expand on? Feel free. Yes.
Hey, hello, my name is Tashi.
Hi,
That was
Tashi.
very inspiring. I'm like,
Yes.
wow, I just came back to Berlin like 3 days ago, and I'm like, yes, good on you.
Nice.
I'm a MPA student,
Mm-hmm.
and from your talk, like, I'm also creating my sort of a consultancy. I am a co-founder of an NGO already, but now I'm doing my consultancy and founding it from scratch.
So you're also a serial entrepreneur.
Exactly. I
Yes.
have this bug that bites me.
Yes, 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 yes.
So I was thinking about how was your journey founding the Imagineers Lab, because you were saying about some moments in your life that you will start adding more concepts until you came with the whole framework. So how was this path? Like, because you didn't create like, oh, now I know this is my framework.
Yeah.
This is my. So how was this is my first question. So how was this moment of like, how was the journey?
The journey, yeah. I mean, I tried to trace the journey, but I would say, I was going through these different stages, these different sectors. And at some point when I left philanthropy, I was a little bit, I don't know if I was burned out, but maybe fed up in a way. And I wanted to take a step back and just try to have a meta perspective on what I've experienced, what some of the things were that kept coming back and kept coming into my life. One thing that kept coming back was working with boards. I have my issues working with boards. If those boards are very intricately connected, or if they want to have a lot of say in operations, if boards are there as like advisory or strategic, like political strategic advisory, whatever, that makes a lot of sense, I think. But when they are very much in operations, very connected to operations, then it makes it hard, I think, because then as someone who's in a leading position, in a managing position, you're always translating the operations to the board. So that for me was something where I felt, okay, if I do not want to work with the boards, but I want to lead an organization, it cannot be an association and it cannot be a foundation. So what other ways do I go? Then someone was like, okay, can I go to a company? Will I be like a policy person? But then I realized, yeah, no, I don't like big organizations. I don't like institutions. I like to change them. I like to work with them and kind of advise, but I don't want to work in these systems. So that was also, again, I was kind of deducing where I could go. But at some point, I realized that in all of my stations, I had this: where are the gaps, and how can we fill this gap? And I think it was very emergent how we arrive at concepts and so forth. It was very emergent. But then, for example, so I co-founded with Wasima Labish. He's also an alumna, and she already had ventured into critical futures thinking. And then I came with the whole imagination thing, and then it was just a good match.
Yeah, was one of my doubts, like my question of how did you merge knowledge with other people as well?
Yeah.
Because that's super important, right? Like to broaden the mind
Yeah.
experiences.
One thing that I would also say is be very mindful of who you build an organization with, who you start an organization with. Um, Two things. For one, are your skills are they complementary or are they just overlapping? It doesn't have to be a complete no because you have overlapping skills, but you have to at least identify where the gaps are and then maybe get support elsewhere. But you just have to be very clear about this. This is what I would definitely recommend. And then also, not everybody is made for entrepreneurship. Not everybody is made for the responsibility that comes with it, the self-organizing that comes with it, the ups and downs in terms of having funding and having no funding and all of this. It's not for everyone. I think I'm also at this point in a advantageous position because I don't have kids right now. So I feel like I can go through the ups and downs a little bit better. But be mindful who you start with, and also um, some things you can start by yourself. You can later on get people to work with and associates and so forth. So for example, with us, we have very small operations deliberately, and I work with people that are in my network, that are associates within Imagineers on different projects. That's a good structure for me because it is flexible. I do not have to, I don't have that many like monthly costs, for example. I can minimize that. I can work from everywhere in the world. This also gives me flexibility and so forth. So those were things that were important to me. And based on what was important to me, I then built the organization according to this. But I'm also lucky and happy that there's a little bit of an operational team, and one person is right there in the back. Hi, Ann. Hey, hi, Ann.
Thank you very much. I have another question.
Yeah. Any other? Okay. Mm. Yeah. It's more what? Sorry. Yeah. 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 I think having worked 10 years in civil society, philanthropy, and so forth, I don't consider myself a policy person necessarily, but more of a practitioner. I work within policy fields, but not only. All of these intersection between those sectors. So when I am in meetings with decision makers, I mostly, I would say, I'm being perceived as a executive director or as a manager, as someone who actually does the work. I think looking back, I don't regret at all having studied here. Quite the opposite. Like I said, there's a good network. It got me funding. It got me a job. I don't know if that was the reason I got the job, but at least the person making the decision was also ready. I think it didn't. Yeah, it helped maybe. So that is good, and also just the perspective of I studied political science before that, which was only theoretical. I loved it, but it was only theoretical. I came here to understand a little bit better how institutions tick, and that was important. That was good for the work that I want to do, that I did later on, because it just gave me different perspectives on how to approach policy change, basically. So yeah, it worked out well. Mhm. Yeah. Mm.
whatever it is, whether it's like the conventional startups or like the BlackRocks and the McKinseys, they can change the course of entire countries over
Yeah.
weeks if they want. So how it feels like I feel like you've done some thinking about this, and you probably confront this question as well in your current
Mm.
work at I forget the name, Imagineers, I think.
Imagineers.
Yes. So yeah, like how do you grapple with that question? I guess at a like a ethical level, are you okay? Like, do we have to accept that doing things the right way means doing things slowly? That change takes time.
Mm.
Or you said something about the inner mindset change. That's where change begins. Actually, my last startup was also something around that. Um, is that what you sort of center your focus on, rather than the immense sort of societal disarray that we see ourselves confronted?
Yeah. So for one, what helps with being impatient is meditation. Let me go back to meditation.
Yes.
It really helps, and maybe also I don't know, some professional humility in a way, humility like or complexity humility, because these systems that they are super complex. They had so much time to grow the way that they've grown. This is we're in for a long haul. If you want to change this is an intergenerational project, and this gives me a little bit of comfort that I don't have to change the whole world in my lifetime, but actually I am, a baton is being passed. I'm passing this to the new generation, but also um, it motivates me personally more to see change in my direct vicinity because of something that I did, than to think about, oh, how can I do this, yeah, affect this structure to change completely. I think that especially now, like I said, we are in an interregnum with old structures, power, certainties, everything is crumbling, and people are now searching for what happens afterwards. I don't think that we necessarily only have to look at this big structure that is going to replace the old one, because we've already seen where this can go, especially if you have very hierarchical power structures and people on top that have can do everything with no impunity. This is the outcome that it produces. So if we want to go and have a different way of living, maybe a way of living that is more life affirming, then it starts, I think, from the bottom up. So this is essential work I think that we have to do, and we have to change people's minds. And with imagination, I try to broaden and widen the imagination, because we are so educated to think in specific ways and think in specific frameworks, and some things are just not possible because let's be rational and so forth. But most of it is, I think, a way of programming and a way of explaining a type of world, but we want to create a new one, so we have to widen our imagination. So that's what we're trying to do. I think it was you first. Hi, my name is David. I'm working for social enterprise network Germany. Mm-hmm. It's a policy co-lead, so I'm the classic critique policy person, I guess. Okay. Thank you so much. It was really inspiring, really, and I really like the framework. I just wondered, have you ever thought about applying that sort of thinking to the Hertianic community? Because of those 1,300 or so alumni in Berlin, I would reckon half of them work in very old, very hierarchical institutions. Yes. So is there a way of measuring like the Hertie spirit that's sort of like filtered into these institutions? I think there's a case to be made that that's been the case. Yeah. Or maybe even sort of give them like a workshop on your type of thinking. Yeah. And then measure the impact that will have over time. Have you ever sort of? It's the first time I'm thinking about this, but it's a really good idea, and maybe we talk afterwards and see what we can do. But it's a very good idea, and it's yeah, that's the thing. Especially being at Hertie already kind of widens the perspective on maybe how power works to a certain degree for many people, especially coming from like more rigid structures. So yeah, it would actually make a lot of sense to do this type of imagining work and critical futures work, especially because there's so much. I mean, there's so much methodology, but just to get into the mindset of not just waiting for future to happen, but actually projecting into the future, trying to understand trends, projecting forwards, trying to see how our aspiration emanate into the future. I think this is critical skills to have. So that's actually a very good idea. Let me talk to the Hertie higher ups and see how it goes. I think you first, and then you.
Thank you, Jeff. This has been wonderful. My
Amazing.
name is Juan.
Hi, Juan.
I have some very, let's say, sort of personal questions. First of all, regarding the set of skills, the gap of skills between, whenever you finish a bachelor's, a master's, or whatever it is, it will never be enough, especially if you're doing entrepreneurship.
Yeah.
There's always something else to learn. So how did you manage to choose between the whole set of skills that the world offers for the specific objectives that you have for your entrepreneurship? And that comes maybe with a second, a bit different question, but connected, and it is how you measure or understand impact in Imagineers Lab. Like, what do you see as successful impact? Of course, it's great to the idea of compounding and intergenerational impact, but then right here, right now, what does it mean?
Yeah. So to answer your the first question, the first question was around
Skills.
skills. Yes, how do I see? The thing with me is I always went where my heart would take me. That sounds a little bit cliche, but the way I decided what to study was my interest. I didn't think about necessarily what the next steps would be, but that was my interest. When it came to choosing the masters, again, I wanted to go deeper into how structures work and how policies are being made. So I went into that direction. After Hertie, I wanted to, there's also why I was politicized is working towards Black liberation. So that got me there, and then being there, all of these skills came. And I think that at some point, after 10 years of doing work in different sectors, at some point I just came to the realization, okay, I've gained so many skills, so much knowledge and good networks, so why not go about it? So to me, again, it was an emergent thing, more so than a deliberate decision. I need this, I need that. But I of course, sometimes when I feel, okay, there is, for example, with critical futures methodology, this is a skill that I'm trying to get because I know where I want to take this. But yeah, it was a little bit emergent, a little bit just my passion. And then in terms of the second question, tell me again.
About how you measure on or understand
Impacts, yes. So we developed this qualia model. We look at structure, Haltung was like attitude, and qualia. And I'm asking myself also, how has my experience changed over time? How do I how much do I struggle to explain concepts, or do people understand imagination after they have been, or the transformative potential of imagination as an infrastructure for transition? How do they understand this? We, when we do future labs, we also do some of the classical impact things with like questionnaires and stuff like that. But if we can see a shift in how people think about futures and the necessity of futuring within civil society, philanthropy, and politics, this would be already a great impact. Yes.
Two more.
My name is Luca. I don't have any of these impressive employment records of previous questions, but I just wanted to ask you, talk about the changing world order and the role that one as an individual can play in fostering the change with your own entrepreneurial endeavors. And
Yeah.
I've asked myself, how can one ensure that the thing you try to pursue is really is creating the change that you actually intend to produce in the first place?
Yeah, I think there is no 100% insurance for that. There is no, if we do not take this risk, we will never find out really. So but what you can do is you can try to have people around you, advisors around you, people that you can go to that maybe are a little bit more senior, and talk to them harken back to how you started out. What were your ambitions? How did you adjust what you were doing, and why did you adjust this? And then if you're still going on that track, or maybe going on a different track. To me, at the end of the day, it's all about community, and trying to be in conversation with your community to see if you're still going that path. Because once you are in it, you can definitely get blind. You know, you go after opportunities, you go after things that you think will grow the company or will grow your endeavor, and this can sometimes make you blind as to whether you're still on the path or not. But it's good to have people around you that can remind you, and that also, and I would also say, establish very early a trust-based relationship where people talk like honestly with you. Because at some point, once you build your organization, once there's a little bit of time and energy spent into it, people of course will hesitate to tell you, hey, what you're doing is just not right at all. You know, so establish this early, where you have trusted relationships, where people talk to your yeah, to your heart, and talk truly to you, and that can help. Yes.
I'm Jimena. I
Hi.
am NPT 2024. And I started some entrepreneurs in my life. Like, now I am like doing something with Lou with this letter. So, if you like, I would like to ask you if you could hack your process now based on what you know,
Yeah.
right? It's not about failure, but like what you learn in
Mm-hmm.
life, right? Like, do you have some ideas to like help people to hack the process and make it, I don't know, like faster, easier, or whatever?
Yeah. Okay. If I could go back, I would have started earlier. Looking back at it, um, and to hack the process, there is much support. If you, especially if you're starting a endeavor, adventure here in Germany, there is support that you can get. Financial supports in terms of infrastructure and different things. Seize this. That is something that I would recommend. I didn't do that early on. I'm doing this now, but that would have helped a lot at the beginning. I'm also now working with a fiscal host. At the beginning of my journey, I started working with a fiscal host, which was also very helpful. I would have started with this also earlier if I could. Because if you have this, I mean, everybody knows, is familiar with a fiscal host. What a fiscal host is? It's basically an organization that provides the financial infrastructure, so that you already have like a body, like a judicial body, as you are trying to build up the organization, and it's just very helpful to have something there. And that was one example of helpful infrastructure that you can have, but there are many more of it. And be on the lookout, and don't hesitate to yeah, to take advantage of this.
Maybe, if I may, could be interesting that to write something about this, like in terms of like more operative lessons, right? Like because I, as a migrant in this country,
Yeah.
and I can imagine so many others, like not as in all the conversations when we are here at here navigating bureaucracy when you are like starting something or even your life here, it's really hard.
Mm.
So like if it's more like an
Practical
invitation, if you want to,
practical tips. Maybe
yeah.
this is something that for this network would make sense for all of the guests that come to, I don't know, have like a repository or something where people can just write down practical tips as an, yeah, yeah, with my things.
Done something
Yeah.
similar with that.
Ah, yeah, okay.
Okay. There was, I think, one more question,
Yes.
and then Jeff will stay, so don't worry. So we can have a question, and then we move on to the.
Okay, I can answer this.
Yeah, yeah, go ahead.
Hi, my name is Carl.
Hi.
I've actually was important to the alumni because I was referred by another alumni, and that was interesting topic for me. Really inspiring and huge. And so I work at the CRED as a program coordinator. It's education exchange nonprofit
Mhm.
here in Berlin. So when you were talking at the end, you also mentioned when founding your organization, there was an issue like of the board being in the operation. So at some point,
just to clarify, it wasn't the board of my organization now. My organization doesn't have a board. That was I have advisory boards, but they are advisory board. They're not in the operations. But what I was talking about was just my experience in civil society and in party politics as well with boards and in philanthropy, because all of those had boards. All of those boards were voluntary, so they were not working in the organization. Therefore, as kind of the middle management position or even as the executive director, I always had to translate what is happening in operations, and that was just taking up a lot of time. And I don't think that, for me at least, that's not a very effective model for an organization.
So in that sense, before you were working for someone, so you had to transfer this
Mm-hmm.
information between the layers,
Mm-hmm.
and your solution was to found your own organization.
Yeah, basically, to not to not go into this again, but to found my own organization. Yes. Yeah. Basically, yeah.
Okay, so I think we all deserve a very big round of applause for this very inspiring.
Thank you.
And very insightful. I wrote my questions, which